So the behaviorist debate is the question of whether conditioning techniques used with children is ethical. So my first point would be an agree point. So I'm saying that Jill in 1998 found that when children were rewarded for chores, they completed 20% of house chores. This suggests that operant conditioning in the form of positive reinforcement, so rewards, perpetuates positive behavior from children. And it is ethical, therefore, as it sets children up to be functioning members of society and therefore facing less adversity. So, generally speaking, when a child slash an adult, future adult, I suppose, is not prepared for society, they'll face more adversity, which will cause more cognitive dissonance, which will cause more likely psychological distress and therefore psychological harm to be incurred. So, doing this allows them to learn and understand the key behaviors that are necessary to becoming a functioning member of society. Facing less adversity protects them from future psychological harm. Therefore, this makes conditioning techniques, so operant conditioning in this case, ethical. Additionally, they learn to understand the relationship between work and reward. So, here's my evaluation paragraph. So, however, it suggests that children will perfectly replicate all behaviors they are conditioned to elicit. Moreover, children may also work where there is a reward, where there is a reward, suggesting that it may interfere with the child's natural drive. Shows such as Super Nanny romanticize the professional conditioning of the child. However, parents are not professionals. Therefore, conditioning techniques may vary between each caregiver, which may confuse and psychologically harm the child, as they may not behave in the desired way for one guardian where it is desired for another. So I'm making 2 or 3 main points in this evaluative paragraph. So my first point is that children will not always replicate the behaviors that you're conditioning to, because they don't have perfect memory. Children do not learn unless they have photographic memory. Children do not learn, generally speaking, or people in general, by seeing something once, unless if you're a top 0.00001% genius. And even then, children make mistakes. So if you punish a child for a simple mistake, that may be more productively resolved by just saying, listen, it's okay, I'm not going to punish you or anything like that, just please don't do it again, and explain why it's bad in a productive manner. It may harm the child because they may be trying their best to behave, but again, children aren't perfect. So if you punish them whilst they are still trying their best, they may see, well, what's the point of behaving then, because I'm going to get punished anyway for anything minor. Also, children may also only work where there is a reward, suggesting that it may interfere with the child's natural drive. So generally speaking, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, if there are any studies that may counteract what I'm going to say, but generally, the most successful people, or the more functioning members of society that integrate more smoothly into society, they have a work ethic that's not dependent on the reward afterwards, but just because of a desire to work. This may be an intrinsic factor. So for example, for me, it's to see my success. I suppose my own success would be a reward in some case, but I just like to work. Or if you look at a professional athlete, for example, the reward afterwards might be winning a championship, or it might be getting better, but it's intrinsically, they just like to improve. They just like to dominate. They just like to, So, they just like to pursue more heights. So if you make the basis of a child's work ethic reward, if there is a situation where they are called to work for something that they do not value, where they do not value the quote-unquote reward or the conventional reward that is afterwards, they may not put in much work, and that may be detrimental to maybe the development of the child, or their educational prowess. I was about to say economic prowess, their educational prowess. It's not a entirely productive way to live. It's quite a material way to live. So that can be a danger of conditioning techniques. So my next point is that conditioning techniques are romanticized in shows such as Super Nanny to be professional and to be, impenetrable and foolproof. but parents are not professionals. Parents likely will have taken some child classes, but a lot don't. A lot are too busy working. A lot are too busy trying to prepare for the pregnancy or trying to prepare for the child to be in the home. Of course, I'm 19 years old, so I don't know the procedure, but this is just me predicting, I suppose, what might be going on. Therefore, conditioning techniques are not going to be performed perfectly, not only by the children in terms of following them, but they may not be instilled by the parents themselves. And this might be psychologically damaging to the child, because it may confuse them, because conditioning techniques will have been formulated in a way that's less confusing for a child, but if then you don't know how to perform it properly, then it may be confusing for the child. And not every parent has the patience of Super Nanny. I'm not sure if you guys have watched it, but I recommend you do, just for the sake of this argument or this debate. Super Nanny is a very patient person, a very stern person anyway, when dealing with children. But a lot of parents lash out. A lot of parents have their own issues that are not resolved, their own unsolved trauma. A lot of parents resort to corporal punishment, for example. They might say that's conditioning techniques, but then the ethical implications there, and that might cause a whole different other issue than just following conditioning techniques. If a parent has these issues and they try with conditioning techniques, and then their pride gets the better of them or their emotions get the better of them, it may psychologically damage the child. Furthermore, mum and dad, they might have, or any other guardian, they might have different ways of conditioning their child. This may confuse them, because let's say if I act one way with mum and then I act another way with dad, if I confuse the two one day, I might get punished. So then that's causing psychological harm where the child does not intend to misbehave, but it's just relative to the subjective interpretation of the guardian. So it might cause confusion of the child, and this is obviously unethical. Psychological harm, there's protection from psychological harm, there's a lack of it. So TLDR, the main point of it is, the first one is a protection from future psychological/physical harm. However, the evaluative paragraph is saying there may be a risk of current psychological harm which may carry on to the future. So Morris 2014 criticized the naughty step, and she suggested that it may cause psychological distress to the children or to the child, as they are too cognitively immature to internalize what is happening or the severity of their actions. So generally speaking, most adults have the ability to self-reflect. If I was to say something, and even if my friend if I was to insult my friend, for example, without intending to, or make a joke that was slightly too far, even if my friend didn't tell me, I can pick up on context clues and social cues, and I can understand that maybe it was too far. So in the moment, I can maybe apologize, or afterwards I can apologize, or even if I don't, and it's not really that significant to where an apology is needed, after the interaction, I can look at myself and I can look back at that interaction and go, you know what, that was too far. Let me not do that again. I'm apologetic. And I might be a bit more nice to them afterwards. Children generally, because they'll have less than 10 years life experience, they won't be able to do this to an efficient degree. They'll be able to apologize, etc. But generally speaking, this will be lacking. So punishing them without telling them or educating them on why their behavior is bad, it may confuse them. They may just feel like they're being punished for no reason, and that may be rooted in the fact that, again, they're too cognitively immature to internalize what is happening or the severity of their actions. Now, this is not to say that necessarily that sociological prowess is directly has a causal relationship with age, strongly correlational. But as we've seen with concepts such as Gillick competence, if you've studied law, if you haven't, I suggest you read up on it. It's quite an interesting case. certain situations can cause the emotional intelligence of a child to mature quickly, very quickly relative to their age. But generally speaking, on the average of the average child will be, or maybe too cognitively immature, to internalize what's happening. So, elaborating on this, a child receiving a harsh punishment as an extension or manifestation of the principle of the naughty step, so being isolation, may confuse a child who interprets their actions as insignificant. So isolation, the naughty step, is seen with a variation of punishments, even way to the extremes, such as prison. Prison follows a similar principle to the naughty step. Go on the naughty step, you're not allowed to interact with people. You're there to face the wall. You're on the naughty step now, you're naughty. It's almost public embarrassment, it's almost public humiliation, especially if you have siblings. Even if you don't, you feel tied there by conditioning, by your parents. It's not a nice experience. So this is unethical, as it may cause psychological harm as a result. Furthermore, children often lack the ability to verbalize their emotions as well as adults do. Where they may have misbehaved to convey an emotional need that they otherwise would not be able to, operant conditioning, so punishment in this case, would likely be used. So evaluation here, I'd say, is that it is a strong argument. Children may reap the benefits from conditioning techniques once they have matured to a later age. So if you see here, I'm not exactly just slating the argument completely, or just saying that it's totally good, or I'm not glazing it. Like, I'm not saying to the argument this is impenetrable, it's absolutely amazing, but I'm giving a solution to the issue. I think that shows more evaluative prowess than just saying this is a weak argument, because I'm saying that while it may be inappropriate to use to young children, once they have developed the cognitive maturity, so if we go back, if you see here, the cognitive maturity to internalize what is happening, once they have developed that skill, conditioning techniques in this manner, so operant conditioning techniques, may benefit a child. And I don't mean later age, like a teenager, because then root behaviors and a root personality trait has kind of been almost established or rooted in a child. It's very rare that they completely turn around or completely deviate from their root personality. Something even like being between the ages of 7 to 13, 14 years old. And even past then, people can, I think past then, people gain a lot more independence. So that's kind of, in my opinion, or Bobby's opinion even, the critical period where it's important to instill certain behaviors in the child. So, so children may reap the benefits from conditioning techniques once they have matured to a later age. At an earlier age, other techniques may be more beneficial. So you can even give an example of that if you do a little bit of research. I don't have an example personally, but of other techniques that are used to allow children to behave more productively or positively. So the ability to internalize and comprehend the consequences and magnitude of their actions would make operant conditioning more effective. Therefore, it may be unethical where the child is not sufficiently psychologically developed. So, an advantage, effectiveness in schools. McAllister et al. Found a decrease in inappropriate behavior where praise was given for positive behavior and disapproval for inappropriate behavior. So children associated praise with positive behavior and vice versa. Therefore, conditioning techniques are ethical as it predisposes children to positive learning environments, as children will be encouraged to act appropriately, which creates a snowball effect, as seen in a study conducted by Lefrancois. So, with this point, I'll make this short. I won't waffle as much as the first one. Generally, conditioning techniques, if children in a classroom behave well, it's a snowball effect, because they get praised, they get happy, they want more praise, so they behave better, and it's a snowball effect, where there is inappropriate behavior. Disapproval does not necessarily mean punishment. This is classical conditioning here. It's not necessarily operant conditioning. While the praise may be seen as a reward, they're associating. So so where there might be negative behavior or inappropriate behavior, I should say, because negative is subjective. Where there is inappropriate behavior, they'll face disapproval, and that behavior may be extinguished, or it may from there lay dormant, and therefore the only behavior that's left in its fullest capacity are the positive behaviors or the appropriate behaviors, and therefore the snowball effect will take place. So evaluation paragraph, I would say, so evaluation paragraph, evidence suggests that praise and disapproval is not necessary for the development of appropriate behavior. So, for example, Japanese schools have sustained, readily motivated students yet barely use a reward system. To make life easier, you may want to get a study for this, but I don't think you need one, to be honest. This suggests that conditioning techniques are not the driving force behind the attainment of desired behavior, but rather the structure of the educational system itself. Consequently, this may render the use of conditioning techniques unethical, as they do not address the root problem of the cause of inappropriate behavior. So, conditioning a child, again, may not address the root problem of their behavior. If they are misbehaving because of a completely different factor that's not known by Western society, but Eastern society, such as Japanese schools, that they have acknowledged, then there is an issue there. It's unethical, because then children are being punished by a flawed system. So Montessori education criticized conditioning techniques as they are argued to be harmful to a child's psychological development. Children offered a reward for drawing spent half as much time as the control group. Students praised for a maths test did worse on the second test compared to the control group that were told they were lazy. So Lepper et al. Dweck. This suggests that conditioning techniques used may interfere with a child's internal drive to learn, which may cause demotivation. This is unethical, as it puts children in a disadvantaged position to learn and prosper. If you watch sports, then this following point I'm about to say may resonate with you. So, a lot of child athletes, for example, when given the spotlight too early, lose their drive and hunger. So, for example, if anybody here watches or is in touch with basketball, student athlete Mikey Williams, he was in top 5 of his class when he was younger, put in the spotlight, and we've seen a stagnation or decline of his ability, right? Or because of his access to fame and a lot of money comparable to some NBA players, so the highest level of basketball, then he's kind of waned off. Here it's seen that where there is a reward already pre-established for just drawing, for just doing the bare minimum, then children will spend half as much time. So they will have less of a drive to just draw because they want to draw, to do the maximum, to achieve the best, or put in an amazing amount of effort just to put an amazing amount of effort in, because the reward's already there, so they're just sitting back and just relaxing. Whereas, the other study, so Dweck, where children were praised on a maths test, they did worse on the second test compared to the control group that were told they were lazy. So this suggests, again, that you need to ignite a competitive spirit within children or people in general, because they were told they were lazy and they did better the next test. What does that tell you about them? They may not need to be conditioned. They may just need to have an their internal drive ignited or reinforced. So advantage, the use of conditioning techniques with vulnerable groups of children. So neurodivergent children are shown to benefit from conditioning techniques, such as through ABA, applied behavior analysis, operant conditioning. Lovas found that this increased social interactions among children with ASD through a reward system. Robinson et al.'s token economy for children with ADHD/hypersensitivity issues and the Funhaler for asthmatic children, so that's Cheney et al., demonstrate the benefit of conditioning techniques for vulnerable group of children, so asthmatic children, This is therefore ethical, as without this, the children would likely suffer from psychological or physiological distress, as they will be less socially interactive or would be discouraged from using their inhaler, for instance. In that case, if they're discouraged from using their inhaler, if they leave it at home, if they go to school and they have an asthma attack, a severe asthma attack or something like that, then it could be detrimental, it could be even fatal for the child. So these techniques allow such children to become integrated members of society. Without such, they may face harm. So evaluation for this, you can say that the methodology of Lovaas' study has been called into question due to the presence of research bias. The research that praises such was conducted by Lovaas himself, providing a decrease in external reliability. So for example, if I conducted a study and then I did a review of that study and just praised it, then that's less valid. Of course it's less valid and it's less reliable because it hasn't been peer reviewed by other psychologists who are looking at it through the closest to an objective lens. So there was no random allocation of participants in experimental conditions as well, so this is a decreased validity. As other extraneous variables or confounding variables, such as like as other maybe coming into. So there was no random allocation of participants in experimental conditions, which means that there is a decreased validity as well. Other confounding variables may have affected the dependent variable. So the implementation of techniques based on flawed evidence then could be suggested to be unethical, as it may provide other negative side effects that psychologists are unaware of. Moreover, financial reward systems would only be available to schools with a high budget, as most educational institutions are on a small or decreasing budget. That's Neasy et al. This means that some children would receive treatment and others would not, which is unethical. So, next one, biological. The ethics of neuroscience. From here on, I'm going to give you my introduction. Please do not copy it. You will get done for plagiarism. You will fail your exam. You may get banned from the exam entirely. Again, do not copy my introduction. The next following points, I wouldn't recommend you follow and the previous ones for the behaviorists. I should have said this in the introduction, but I wouldn't recommend you copy them verbatim. The lucky thing is, and the good thing is, the majority of students in your year will have the same points because you're learning the same syllabus and you have the same or similar teachers with similar teaching styles. The content generally will be the same. But phrasing wise, have your own have your own style to it. If you want to structure something slightly differently and you know it won't negatively affect your essay's success, do that. If you phrase things exactly how I would, for example, then you're always going to be one step behind. So yeah, just take the evidence and the general points and phrase it in your own way. So for my introduction, I wrote, the understanding of neuroscience since the case of Phineas Gage has expanded exponentially. This is primarily through technological advancements such as PET scans in Rain et al., for instance. However, some psychologists doubt the ethics of neuroscience, arguing that the scientifically useful conclusions drawn from such studies should not trump the potential costs to the participants or those affected from the research results, particularly wider society. Conversely, others suggest that we reap both individual and societal benefits so vast that it is necessary for neuroscience to be explored, such as through stress reduction. So I've given a brief overview of neuroscience and the history of it, and I've dropped Phineas Gage. So immediately then, an examiner reading this is kind of like, okay, he kind of knows what he's on about. I haven't elaborated on the Phineas Gage case. I haven't explained what happened in the Phineas Gage case, but an examiner reading this has gone, okay, he knows what he's talking about. You know, it's an introduction, it's not a point, so you shouldn't need to elaborate loads. So this is primarily through technological advancements such as PET scans and Rain et al., for instance. This is a declarative here, it's an assertive statement, and this is true. It's an irrefutable point. So if you're going to take that route where, you know, you're extremely confident, I think one of my top tips for, I think, essay writing is you have to come across as confident. You can have a very balanced argument with still coming across as confident. So it's an irrefutable point. If you were to say that PET scans or technological advancements did not help our understanding of neuroscience, then you are mental. That is unequivocally wrong. Of course, case studies such as Phineas Gage, HM, for example, with having his hippocampi removed, I'm pretty sure hippocampus removed, case studies are also massively help our understanding of neuroscience. But in contemporary society, technological advancements have, and this will be elaborated later in the essay. It's a preamble almost. So, and it might seem like I'm just trying to big myself up here and describe myself as Einstein, but it's not. I'm looking at this. If any other person wrote this, I would say the same thing. I'm not trying to act like a Ronaldo, for example. So, and then I've given a slight counter argument. So for the AO3 marks, however, some psychologists doubt the ethics of neuroscience, arguing that this. It's a very brief point. Conversely, others suggest that we reap both individual and societal rewards. And then I've segued very smoothly into the main point of the next paragraph, which is stress reduction. So stress reduction from here as well, it will be less. So before the behaviorist points, when I was writing it, I realized it was quite long and it was quite elongated. So here I've done it in a more note format. I think anyway, I'm pretty sure. So it will be less like tedious to read and copy down if that's what you're doing. So stress reduction. Ethical advantage, and an ethical advantage of researching stress reduction is that it improves overall societal health. Lewis Hodgson, part of MindLab International, so a company, he and other psychologists curated the song Weightless, which demonstrated a 65% decrease in reported stress among participants and a 35% reduction in the usual physiological resting states. So that reduction in physiological resting states almost puts an objective lens on it that it does cause a reduction in stress, because cortisol, the stress hormone, is directly correlated with physiological resting states. If you're more stressed, or if you have more adrenaline / cortisol, then your resting states, so your BPM, your heart, for example, your heart rate naturally will be higher at rest. But if you're less stressed, it will be less. So this suggests that the study of neuroscience results in empirically proven methods of stress reduction. Elevated levels of cortisol, the hormone implicated with stress, as I've said before, has been linked to a plethora of health problems such as cardiovascular diseases, obesity, depression, and gastrointestinal problems. This means that the study of neuroscience over time will benefit from the health of society. Here, to be honest, this is almost the skeleton of the argument. It's got the main point, I suppose, in the evidence, but I'm leaving it up to you to do the paragraph making, the writing, that sort of stuff. I'd recommend making your own for your exams, making an answer for every possible question that can come up, and you'll be fine. By the end of the exam season, you will be burnt out, but the summer afterwards is worth it. I'm telling you, it is. So evaluation paragraph. So a strong argument as a net reduction in stress results in a healthier and subjectively happier society, so that's ethical. We may also reap economic benefits from this, as a more consistently functioning workplace may increase life expectancy, for example. So we might see the retirement age may go up, which means that more people are going to be in work for a longer period of time. However, there is a respective 35% and 65% deficit in the study's findings, possibly even lower. So if you look here, 65% decrease in stress among participants. This means that it's not 100%, which means that there is 35% deficit and a 35% reduction in usual physiological resting states. It's not, again, 65% deficit. Again, if there was an 100% reduction in physiological resting states, you would be dead, to be fair. You can't have 0 BPM and be like, yeah, no, I'm not stressed. These also depend on the resting state itself. So if my resting heart rate is like 80 BPM, that's quite high. If it goes down 35%, like, to be fair, that's like an athlete's. But if the higher it is, the more, let's say it's 120, for example, or 100, going down by 35%, 65 BPM, which is decent, but it's still kind of on the higher echelon of resting states. So it may not necessarily mean that a 35% reduction means that it will make people healthy immediately, but it does help, is the point. It does help. So there is no universal foolproof method of reducing levels of cortisol except through drug therapy. That's the be all and end all. Every other method may propose correlational results, but it's not absolutely causal. Therefore, the validity of the study may be doubted, harming the ethics of neuroscience, and it may leave individuals who do not reap such benefits confused or in a worse state before. So, for example, the 35%, some participants there may see higher than 35% or 35% because they really like music. It might not be because of the song, it might be because they really like music. So there are other factors there that might come into play other than the components of the song. So, cool. So the study of neuroscience is my next point. The study of neuroscience contributes to ongoing health concerns. This is a disagree point really, by just saying it's unethical. Contributes to ongoing health concerns such as the obesity crisis via neuromarketing. So Schomburg, neuroscientist at the University of Texas, found that people were more likely to eat junk food they had a greater exposure to. A multi-billionaire corporation can advertise consistently to the masses, especially unconsenting children. This would be particularly unethical. So the advertisement, for example, and neuromarketing is playing on our neuroscience. It's playing on the neurological function of the brain. The more things that we are exposed to, we're more likely to eat. So children, for example, aren't able to consent. They're under the age in the UK of 16, so they're unable to consent legally. This means that when they're walking through the street and they're seeing these KFC ads, these McDonald's ads, these Pepsi ads, these Coca-Cola ads, all of these sweet ads that are unequivocally unhealthy for a child to consume, a multi-billionaire corporation may be predisposing a child to a life of obesity or a life of unhealthiness, reduced lifespan, more susceptibility to greater mental illnesses or greater physiological illnesses, based on advertisements that they have not consented to seeing. So this is proven by the Orange Underground, an advertising campaign they conducted by the subsidiary of PepsiCo, and they hired a neuromarketing firm to study the neurological effects behind the consumption of Cheetos. So companies are already doing this, is the point. Companies are already doing this. So this means that they're researching and they are finding that there is a proven neurological effect on people that transcends their consenting ability, and it may be so unethical that these corporations may suffer legal liability. Therefore, the study of neuroscience may predispose society to embracing unhealthy behaviors in the pursuit of profit. So, evaluative argument, I think this is a strong argument. Corporations have the financial ability to employ numerous neuroscientists and firms to conduct studies. Given how unregulated they are, it may mean that they can use these results, unethical or ethical, for their own monetary gain. Corporations may be able to control us on the subconscious level based on things we see in our peripheral or things like that, based on neuroscience results. And I know I'm sounding like those Illuminati conspiracy theorists, but this is relatively grounded in reality. And then did this suggest, I put dots so you could do it yourself, so you don't lose on like the essay skills part. So similarly, larger societal impacts on neuroscience may be rooted in the stigma attached to studies such as Brain, Bushbaum and Lacasse study on brain glucose metabolism in those found NGRI. This study may result in the unjust labeling of individuals as criminals based on biological factors such as brain cancer, Rain et al. Found that those found NGRI had significant brain dysfunction in the amygdala, hippocampus, corpus callosum, occipital lobe, and other components of the brain. So because this study here is already part of the curriculum, you already know it from your classical conditioning. So I haven't gone into it like specifically because it's not like a new piece of evidence that might get me like marks, I suppose. You can very neatly and smartly fit it into your argument. It may predispose individuals with a similar brain to unfair treatments by either the judicial system, the government, or wider society, as information on their brain scans may be unregulated in terms of confidentiality. So the lead coroner in the it's kind of like a second point leading on for it, I suppose. The lead coroner in the neuropathy of Stephen Paddock, a mass shooter, so serial killer, stated that there is a difference between correlations and causality as to brain dysfunction and violent behavior. However, a jury consisting of lay people will not be able to establish this distinction. Therefore, the study of neuroscience may result in legal injustice. So the lead coroner is able to say, listen, his brain dysfunction may not have caused the behavior, but it may have contributed, but it may not cause that. But if a jury is presented with a case and the defendant has that particular brain, then they may immediately say, yeah, he's guilty. You know what I'm saying? He might say, yeah, he's cooked. He's guilty. So that might result in legal injustices. That might taint the way that they view the evidence. They may look through things with a rose-tinted glass or rose-tinted glasses. So the concept of a stigma attached to a psychopath brain is foreseeable. However, it is not realistic. This because most individuals in their lifetime will not undergo a brain scan. This means that this knowledge will not be known anyway. If it is, then their general behaviors will be weighted against such stigma, and people will not act in accordance with such stigma anyway. If they are given a brain scan, but they are reported to be an extremely kind person throughout the entirety of their life, then people may bear that in mind, but they've been an extremely kind person all of their life, so that's their experience. So given the advancements in the forensic technological... That English is awful, that's my bad, guys. Given the advancements in forensic technology, a jury would be presented with a mountain of far more convincing and concrete evidence than a brain scan. Therefore, the chances of wrongful conviction or injustice due to a possible stigma, while not zero, is arguably incredibly slim. But this is presented for everything. It could be gender, it could be race, it might be sexuality. You know, a jury may not be free of prejudice inflicted by the schemers, for example. So, next point is that it is ethical, as it can treat criminal behavior. The study of neuroscience has allowed psychologists to understand the relationship between paroxetine and lowered aggression and impulsive responses. In turn French there, or Italian, whatever language it is. So Cherrick et al., Pennsylvania University, and the Nanyang Technological University. DBS, so deep brain stimulation, reduced physically and sexually violent responses in participants to certain prompts by 47% and 70% respectively. This suggests, and you do it yourself, as there is a reduction in harm committed, inevitably, given how £9.5 billion is spent on recidivism. So, it's like reoffending rates. The economy would receive alleviated pressure, as there would be less reoffending of violent crime. Therefore, so to conclude, the study of neuroscience seems to be relatively ethical because ... and that's where you fill it in. Whilst there are concerns relating to its ethics due to ... it overall results in a net positive for society and therefore ethical, as it contributes to a protection from physiological or psychological harm. So the next contemporary debate is cognitive for the reliability of eyewitness testimony. So for my introduction, I wrote, the reliability of eyewitness testimony has been a contentious debate and has provided changes in the criminal justice system through the findings and conclusions of studies such as Loftus and Palmer. Some psychologists suggest that memory reconstruction is unreliable due to natural or cognitive bias, whereas others believe that memory reconstruction is often an is often accurate and should be used as a reliable tool in the criminal justice system and other institutions where it is needed. So, for my agree point, I said that the use of schemas in the reconstruction of memory makes eyewitness testimonies unreliable. So first, I would define a schema as a method of information organization, so packets of knowledge that allow us to understand and make sense of the environment around us. However, forcing new circumstances into schemas increases the likelihood of such a schema distorting and therefore flawed memory recollection. This suggests that where an eyewitness witnesses an event that may be traumatic, so for example World War II, so repression in World War II veterans, that's Karen and Widener, or a foreign event, there may be memory distortion, so that's in Bartlett. Therefore, and then you do the link yourself. So evaluation, this is a strong argument. It has been demonstrated to be memory reconstruction has been demonstrated to be easily manipulated, especially by the phrasing of questions. So that's Loftus and Palmer and Loftus and Zani. Obviously in Loftus and Palmer, when they gave the smashed condition, I believe the average estimation of speed was 40.8 miles per hour, and that suggests that when you phrase a question that more aligns with somebody's schema, then their memory is likely to be distorted. But even the fact that just the phrasing of questions can change the way somebody recollects or reconstructs or records or recounts their memory. It shows that it is easily manipulated. So this was so influential that the Devlin report concluded that unless if circumstances were highly unusual, then eyewitness testimony should not result in conviction. This suggests that there is an acknowledged reasonable margin of error for eyewitness testimonies. Contrary evidence, such as Ewell and Cutshall, suggests that the witness recall can be extremely accurate in the case of an attempted robbery with a gun. So this study had higher ecological validity, which may suggest that eyewitness testimonies are in fact reliable. So flashbulb memories are momentous events where heightened emotions seem to improve recollection, such as death, crime, a wedding, or worldwide interest, such as 9/11. This is argued by researchers to have a similar structure to normal memory reconstruction. People remember location, activity, the informant, and effect of event on emotions or mental states. That's Brown and Kulik. Eyewitness testimonies are often needed after such events. Therefore, for the most part, these are flashbulb memories by default. This suggests, and then you do the rest yourself. Some researchers argue that on the other hand, flashbulb memories are structurally indifferent from normal memories, as they present features of a traditional schema or schemas that govern the format of storytelling or memory recollection. So that's Neisser 1982. Therefore, they are just as susceptible to manipulation as normal memory, suggesting that flashbulb memories can be just as inaccurate. Weapon Focus in Loftus et al. Recorded that participants recorded a scenario of somebody presenting a check rather than a gun to a cashier far more accurately. So there were two conditions, one where somebody presented a check, one where somebody presented a gun, and people remembered the check condition far more accurately. So that means that that suggests that contrary to prior arguments, where there is a weapon, people don't remember it as accurately. So this suggests that memory recollection with flashbulb memories is largely nuance dependent. So I would say this is a strong argument, as repression on memory recollection suggests that eyewitness testimonies are unreliable. Freud suggested that heightened emotions may inhibit memory through repression. Therefore, those who experience traumatic or perceived traumatic events may give inaccurate testimonies. Victims of sexual abuse are shown to not recall events, that's Williams, demonstrating the manipulative effect that strong emotions have on memory recall. So, disagree, this is a minor point. However, this does not mean that eyewitness testimony should be completely disregarded. It would lower the conviction rates of crimes that rely on them in the absence of evidence, such as rape or murder, where the perpetrator is unidentifiable by means other than confrontation with eyewitnesses. Where the victim has not filled out a rape kit, their testimony will be integral to achieving justice. If eyewitness testimonies are therefore classed as so unreliable that they cannot be admitted in court or taken quote-unquote with a grain of salt, will this impede in the course of justice in our legal system? Furthermore, it may be difficult to prove domestic/child abuse situations. Abuse where there is no injury present may suffer and therefore result in injustice. In contemporary judicial systems, however, mock jurors acknowledge the possibility for misidentification errors and use this in their decision making. That's green. Therefore, the use of eyewitness testimony should be used as the margin of error is taken into account. If amendments are to be made, it may be to use eyewitness testimonies where the offender is of the same age group. Anastasi and Rhodes, 2006, found that all age groups are most appropriate where recognizing an offender of their own age group. Pozzolo and Lindsay reviewed studies that tested over 2,000 participants, finding that children under 5 were less likely than older children or adults to make correct identifications in the parades. This suggests that children would be more reliable in their identification of child or adolescent criminals, suggesting that eyewitness testimonies may be overall unreliable as they are reliant on special conditions such nuance such as age to be reliable. So the positive assumption, my introduction was the relevancy of positive psychology has been a contentious debate since its prevalence in the early 1990s. Seligman is scrutinized as positive psychology is often thought to be a practice that is based in pseudoscience and is unscientific, as research such as Myers and Diener's literature review was secondary research, not primary research. However, Seligman and other positive psychologists may argue that the individual and societal benefits from positive psychology outweigh the benefits from other assumptions, such as their benefit to the educational systems. My first point, agree point. Mindfulness has demonstrated relevance as it may minimize mental health issues and decrease stress levels in students/wider society in comparison to NHS support. Studies conducted by the University of Cambridge with an opportunity sample of 602 students during exam seasons was split into two groups, so 301 students each. The group that pursued mindfulness were found to be below the threshold needed for the NHS group, whereas the group that underwent regular NHS support and therefore other assumptions such as CBT, so the cognitive assumption, were found to be at or above that threshold. This suggests that positive psychology mindfulness is relative to society as, and then boom. So evaluation point, I would say that university students by nature will be diverse, as universities, particularly Oxford, aim to replicate the demographic percentages of regular society. So for example, roughly there's around 2 to 3% black people in the UK, and they at Cambridge and Oxford, or at least Cambridge, trying to replicate that. So that means that there is a population validity. Therefore, it is generalizable. This is a strong argument. Scientific nature of the study ensures that it is valid, not student. So a likely diverse sample means there's population and therefore external validity, as I've already said. This means that it can be applied across the majority of society. Despite this, it only studies students. This selective sample may only be applicable to students or previous students. Those who left education post-16 may reap different results. Positive psychology, nevertheless, can empower all demographics across society to take control of their subjective well-being. However, other psychologists may disagree. Positive psychology has resulted in harmful creations of measure in educational institutions such as well-being league tables in schools. The upsurgence of positive psychology, rooted in arguably outdated pseudoscience, so Buddhism and humanism, may run the risk of causing more detriment than benefit. Jessica Dayton of the London Anna Freud Clinic for Children warned that it may run the risk of oversimplifying mental health and well-being, as mindfulness cannot be measured linearly. Therefore, you do it yourself. Furthermore, the monopolization of well-being across institutions may pose numerous ethical concerns. If principles from positive psychology such as mindfulness and therefore assumptions such as are implemented into league tables, then the genuine care of students may be trumped by the desire of the school to appear better. Consequently, schools may discriminate against high-risk individuals who are likely to report lesser subjective well-being from disadvantaged backgrounds and demographics. The assumption of living the good life attributes happiness as subjective well-being to fitting 3 criteria, where somebody is limited due to a neurological factor such as depression or autism, for example, like ASD, then this may leave them in a worse spot, a more compromised position. This suggests that mindfulness is irrelevant in society as it's not applicable, and then you elaborate a little bit more for your link. My evaluation for this paragraph: this argument holds merit but is weak because it is unrealistic. Well-being league tables may be integrated and and have already taken form through a university satisfaction rates, for instance, on like the universityguide.com or .co.uk, sorry. Nevertheless, academic prowess, alumni employment rates and success will always be the determining factors for an institution's prestige or success or ranking. Therefore, these concerns are not necessarily rooted in reality. Furthermore, in 2024, discrimination against marginalized groups is far less likely to take place, as the risk for exposure is far too high given the advent of social media, although it arguably takes place anyway nevertheless. It would be unrealistic to suggest that discrimination does not take place. So, in this field anyway. So, another agreed point, positive psychology has proven its relevance to society as it benefits those in the workplace. So boosting performance and other health benefits. So an article published by Darren J. Good, Christopher J. Liddy, Teresa M. Gloom, and Joyce E. Bono. So I would just say Darren J. Good et al. Reviewed over 4,000 scientific papers on mindfulness. They assert that meditation lowers activity in brain regions responsible for attention lapses by They assert that meditation lowers activity in brain regions responsible for attention lapses by 50%. This means that the employment of techniques of positive psychology may allow employees to work up to 50% more efficiently and faster and reach flow states more often, which has been implicated with a higher report of subjective well-being. So if employees reach flow state more often, it means that they will be able to be happier individuals because they're implicated. So this has also been implicated with a shrinkage of the amygdala responsible for the fight or flight response. This region runs the risk of being hijacked by perceived stressful situations, impairing emotional, cognitive, and behavioral control. Employing the techniques of positive psychology, people can reap positive biological and behavioral benefits. Mental health is a contentious topic temporarily, therefore this makes positive psychology relevant. A meta-analytic review conducted by Short and Malou found that mindfulness plays a role in slowing the biomechanical aging and DNA preservation. This additionally proves the relevance of positive psychology as. So after every paragraph, relate it to the question. Try and weave it throughout in your language to state why it's relevant. So this is relevant because this because. But if you find that at the end of your paragraph you haven't really mentioned it much, link it back and just say this proves that the positive psychology is relevant to society as blah blah blah. It does not have to be an elaborate thing, otherwise your paragraph will be like a whole page and a half long. But I'd say this strong argument, and then you can do it yourself, and then boom, that's your conclusion. So yeah, that's everything. So that's component 1 officially finished. If I've missed anything, again, comment it down. I should be getting component 3 within the next week or two. Obviously, I know that you might have your second round of mock exams now. You'll be reaching study leave within the next 2 or 3 months as well. So I'll definitely try to get up for then. But yeah, thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys later.